UPSC and NPSC aspirants. Welcome to the Hindu Daily Editorial and Current Affairs Analysis. Let us look at the analysis for 11th of July 2026. Today's agenda is going to range from environment and ecology all the way to history and the culture. The front page has the four different news. First is about the High Court. Madras High Court halts the by-elections in the five Tamil Nadu seats. And then the government defends the E20 policy and concedes 3 to 5% mileage drop. IITs and IIMs resist the VBSA Bill 2025, and Sheikh Hasina signals a December return to Bangladesh. First, let us look at the environment and ecology. So the first news is the government defends the E20 uh, blending in the petrol and concedes a 3 to 5% mileage dip. So what E20 is the petrol blended with 20% ethanol, which is a plant-derived alcohol. In an open question and answer frequently asked questions, the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas admitted it can cut the fuel economy by 3 to 5% in some vehicles while defending the wider program. It is not, the program is not cheap because to give the farmers remunerative prices, the center procures the maize-based ethanol at 71.86 rupees per liter before the GST transport and storage. So at $70 per barrel per crude, blending ethanol actually costs more than making pure petrol. So uh, ethanol's cost advantage appears only when the crude spikes to 120 to $138 per barrel, and with today's prices, E20 is more costlier to produce and not cheaper at the pump. So in one line, the consumers may lose a little mileage now to support the farmer income and cut the oil import dependence. So the offsets that are there are higher octane that is lost, better anti-knocking, and a faster combustion, smoother acceleration, and a cleaner energy and negligible particulates, and 40% lower life cycle carbon emissions. Energy security gain, it's because 20% of the fuel sold in the sold is ethanol. India is partly insulated from the global oil price swings and could pass on a small fuel price hikes than the peer nations. So the government frames a two-decade journey altogether when it comes to the ethanol, while in which pilots were held in way back in 2001, and policy formulation came in 2013, and reforms have taken after post 2020, 2018, and the investment started in 2021, and phased blending was started with automakers, testing agencies, oil marketing companies, and Department of Food and Public Distribution consultation. So the way forward is to have transparent mileage impact labeling, E20 tuned engines, and honest communication so that the consumers trust is not dented. Next, let us look at the news about the Ken-Betwa river line. Ken-Betwa is India's first river interlinking project. It transfers surplus of the Ken Basin water to the deficit Betwa Basin, the pilot of 30 links under the National Perspective Plan. So the protest is mostly tribal residents near the Chhatarpur in Madhya Pradesh have resumed a 5 day agitation after the talks have failed, staging a symbolic hanging news satyagraha. And in April, they lay on the symbolic fires over water. So the grievance is they say that the rehabilitation is inadequate and many were left out of the rehabilitation and resettlement for the Ken Betwa when they linked Majgaon range projects and they demanded a hike from 12.5 lakhs to 25 lakhs. So the administration is countering. The collector says that the hundreds of the protesters are from Panna and they're affected by the two irrigation projects and not the Ken Betwa itself. So the state cabinet had cleared 300 crore more, raising the compensation from 5 lakh to 12.5 lakh and added 750 families after a fresh survey. So the ecological cost of the interlinking project is a large part of the project lies inside the Panna National Park and Tiger Reserve, and environmentalists, including a former Union Environment Minister, warns of the damage to the ecology, wildlife, and the forests. The deeper issue is that the big water projects trade the water security for forest loss and displacement, making credible disaggregated identification of project affected families central to the concern. The way forward is to have transparent, project specific rehabilitation and resettlement with grievance redressal mechanisms, independent ecological and the hydrological audits before further links proceed. Next, the World Bank commits 890 million to India's rooftop solar project. So the World Bank Group has committed $890 million to accelerate India's national rooftop solar program, aiming to power millions of the homes and create 1.7 million jobs across manufacturing, installation, and services. So, 820 million are loaned by one of the World Bank's institution, IBRD, and $60 million concessional loan through the Clean Technology Fund, and $10 million grant by the IBRD's Livable Planet Fund. So, on top of this, the bank will also mobilize $4.2 billion in private commercial financing to actually install the household rooftops. It matters because it directly backs India's net zero by 2070 pledge and decentralized generation. And rooftop solar lowers the household bills and eases the load on the distribution companies. So the financial model is on one hand, the sovereign loans itself and the concessional grants and the grant capital. This will de-risk the private lending and having a replicable blended finance template for scaling the green infrastructure projects where the household credit risk otherwise deters the banks. So the jobs angle is the rooftop solar is labor intensive in nature. So the value chain all the way from manufacturing, installation and servicing is going to create large scale employment. Uh, Also sustainable and green employments are created. So the way forward is to have household financing last mile household financing and installer skilling and net metering are the grid readiness so the distributed solar can be absorbed readily. Next, let us look at economy. So here we see that the equity mutual fund schemes grew to 28,973 crore in June, which is a 26.5% jump over May. This is because of the easing geopolitical tensions and hopes of the supportive domestic macroeconomic conditions and a strong retail participation. So this reverses a sharp 40.4% fall the previous month and signals returning risk appetite. So the systematic investment plans, where the investors auto invest a fixed some monthly, it has crossed 10.5 crore for the first time after 4 months near 10.4 crore. The SIP contributions rose to 31,781 crore from earlier 30,954 crore. So the money mostly went into the mid caps, led to the inflows of 6,000 crore, and then the small caps to about 5,600 crore, flexi caps about 5,231 crore, and large caps to 2,067 crore. And the dividend yield funds and the ELSS saw net outflows, and the gold ETFs swung to an 3,443 crore inflows. Uh, why this is significant? Because of the sticky SIPs, which contributing SIPs equal to the 93% of the accounts, provide steady domestic savings cushion that offset the volatile foreign portfolio flows. So this is a structural shift in how Indian markets are funded. The caution is a tilt towards mid and small caps. It raises the risks if the valuations are correct. Next, the retail exposure is now larger and less experienced in nature. So the way forward is to promote the investor education on cyclicality and the drawdowns and sustaining the SIP discipline through the market cycles. Next, let us look at the access to financial health. So Queen Maxima of Netherlands who is UN Secretary General Special Advocate for Financial Health, argued that India must go beyond having a bank account to financial health, that is, managing the daily expenses, absorbing the costs, savings and investing, and planning with confidence. Because the account ownership among adults have jumped from 56% to 89% in a decade. So the access is largely solved. So the next step is usage and the resilience. This is important for Viksit Bharat 2047's shift from welfare to wealth creation and needs healthy household finances. She also met the RBI Governor Sanjay Malhotra on scaling this financial health agenda. So the four actions which are necessary are Jan Dhan 2.0, turn the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana accounts into a resilient platforms by integrating the direct benefit transfer, PM Kisan, Manrega, which is replaced by BBG Ramji, E-Shram Portal, Atal Pension Yojana, and then Pradhan Mantri Jeevan Jyoti Bima Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Suraksha Bima Yojana for informal and the gig workers. And it is notable that the women hold most of Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana accounts, so the gains are gendered. Second, leverage the digital public infrastructure through the account aggregators and the unified lending interface and the DigiLocker and artificial intelligence. Third, build financial health data from household surveys and public-private collaboration. It matters because the household resilience underpins the country level growth and the cushions crisis, and access without use leaves the poor exposed. The way forward is to convert the payment rails into an household financial resilience platform with strong consumer protection. Next, let us look at the sectors of the economy. So, India and UK auto tariffs and the quotas notified ahead of the 15th July. So India has notified the quotas and tariffs for the UK car imports under India-UK Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, which enters into the force on 15 July as per the DGFT notification. The concessions are 20,000 completely built units of the petrol and diesel passenger vehicles may be imported at a concessional 30 to 50% duty, varying by the size of the car, and down from the nominal 66% to 110%. So the quota rises to 37,000 and cars by year 5, and the tariff settling at about 10%, and then gradually falls to 15,000 by year 15. So this is like a deliberate tapering, which is opening gradually. So the protective design by liberalization is staged so the domestic makers get the breathing room for electric vehicles, hybrids, and the hydrogen vehicles graded by the cost and not by the size of the engine. The concessions start only from the year 6, giving a buffer to the India's nascent clean mobility industry. The impact is having cheaper premium UK cars for the consumers, but the competitive pressure on the domestic oil original equipment manufacturers, and the structure is a template for India's cautious quota capped FTA approach. Next, the risk is the import surges in the premium segment and the pressure on the electric vehicle localization if the buffer years aren't used well. So the way forward is to monitor the import volumes and then deepen the electric vehicles in the component manufacturing and convert the buffer into a genuine competitiveness. Next, we will see the uh, quick commerce apps, Swiggy, Instamart, Blinkit, Big Basket, JioMart, and Zepto, and the corporate retail chains have spread even into the rural markets, and they are squeezing the local brick and mortar shops or the kirana shops and the small retailers across Kerala and India. So the traders' body, which is the in Kerala, estimates a net of 10 to 15% annual fall in the number of the shops, and the corporate players who fix the prices push the small traders' margins down until they fall into a debt trap. So the large story is the quick commerce runs unmarked neighborhood godowns, also called as the dark stores, stocked via large-scale supply chains, so the local producers and the wholesalers are bypassed. So the competition question is the All India Consumer Products Distributors Federation complained to the Competition Commission of India about deep discounting and the predatory pricing, but no action has followed. The discounts are often perceived but not actual because the pack weights differ. Then a parallel study pegs that 5.77 lakh cable TV job losses since the year 2018, but the Kerala's cooperative cable model, through its Kerala Vision, which is the name for cable TV in Kerala, 6,000 plus operators are sharing the profits, so small players can survive by banding together. So, unchecked predatory pricing can hollow out the local retail employment and supply chains before regulation catches up. So the way forward is having predatory pricing, scrutiny by the Competition Commission of India, and then Kirana digitization through the ONDC type of open rails and cooperative aggregation. Next, about the Parandur Airport is on hold because Tamil Nadu has passed the 27,400 crore greenfield Parandur Airport, which is Chennai's proposed second airport, though no formal government order has been issued yet. The reason is it needed 5,300 acres from 13 plus villages. Ekanapuram fell within both the proposed runways, and 26.54% of the site is wetland as per the TIDCO. So the protest is after 1,000 days of the farmers' agitation since 2022 over displacement and the water body loss. The state minister signaled they would drop it and look for alternatives. So the limbo is 1,700 acres were already acquired in Nagapattu and Nilvoy. So those farmers now face uncertainty over the land, livelihoods, and whether their land will be returned. Next, the airports are economic anchors which pull in investments, and the delay risks repeating the Chennai's missed 2000s Sri Perumbudur chance, and the only ready alternative is Pannur, which would add 8 to 9 years of approvals and construction. So the core tension is infrastructure-led growth versus the wetland ecology and the land acquisition and the rehabilitation of the people with predictability of the decision making itself. So the way forward is to have a firm and transparent decision with site selection balancing the hydrology, uh, on which a 2024 hydrology study already exists, and the ecology and the number of families which have to be relocated. Next, let us look at polity governance and legislation. So, the Madras High Court has restrained the Election Commission from notifying the by-elections to five Tamil Nadu assembly seats: Tiruchi East, Perundurai, Ambasamudram, Veeralimalai, and Karur until July the 31st on a public interest litigation. The winners have resigned, but their original victories are still under challenge through election petitions, and the losing petitioners have also asked to be declared as the real winners. So the legal question is, can the EC treat this as a clear vacancy under Section 151A of the Representation of Peoples Act 1951, which obliges it to fill the casual vacancies within 6 months when the seats are still sub judice. So uh, the petitioner cited Sanjeevaya case of 1961, ECIA versus TRS case of 2011, and Pramod Lakshman Gudade case, that by-elections shouldn't be held while related election petitions are still pending and to avoid a seat being represented by two people. So, a distinction should be drawn between those who resigned before the petitions were filed and those who resigned after, and the PIL petitioner's locus standi was also questioned. So the bench's reasoning is where the purity of the democratic process is at the stake, a narrow pedantic locus objection can't apply, and the final orders will come after the counter affidavits. It matters because it tests the balance between the commission's statutory duty to fill the vacancies and the risk of preempting contested results. Next, the news is about the 130th Constitutional Amendment Bill. So the Constitution 130th Amendment Bill would automatically remove a PM, CM, or minister who spends 30 consecutive days in judicial custody to plug a governance from jail vacuum on which the Constitution and the Representation of People's Act 1951 are silent. So a joint parliamentary committee chaired by Aparijita Sarangi recommends replacing removal with suspension in both the in both the functionary demerits of office, since removal carried an air of finality and stigma, while suspension is reversible like the service. So most opposition parties declined to join the panel, alleging the malicious intent. So the core objection is the 30-day custody trigger is not tied to any judicial findings of the guilt, and the arrest is an executive or procedural device. So attaching the consequences to the custody risks treating an unproven accusation as a de facto dequalification. So Nalsar, NLU Delhi, and West Bengal National University of Judicial Services and the Association for Democratic Reforms want the trigger shifted to the framing of the charges by the court. So the five recommendations are suspension language and define the serious offences as those punishable with 5 plus years, and an auto reversal clause on discharge or acquittal, and the fast track courts, and a separate schedule of the covered offences. So the federal concern is the panel records of record fears the mechanism could be misused against the opposition rule states used by use of the central investigative agencies. The way forward is to have a judicial threshold, that is a charge framing by the court, plus the safeguards against the selective use of the law. Next, the The Viksit Bharat Shiksha Adhishtan Bill 2025 would repeal UGC, AICTE, and NCTA Acts and merge their functions into a single apex regulator with councils for regulation, accreditation, and the standards. So the institutes of the national importance like IITs, IIMs, ISERs, IIITs, and NITs, and central universities before an joint parliamentary committee chaired by Dr. Jagpat Purandreshwari seeks explicit exemption, citing institutional autonomy over the centralization. Even NDA ruled states like Andhra Pradesh, Meghalaya, and Madhya Pradesh have objected it. And the government's defense is it points to Clause 49, which promises to protect the autonomy of the institution of national importance and institutions of eminence. And then the a graded penalty of up to 75 lakhs and or a closure of an institution. And the IIT Bombay questions why the law and medicine are left out. And the Central Tribal University warns of differential unintended effects on the small rural institutions serving in the tribal areas. So, the critics say the bill exceeds entry 66 of the union list, which limits the center to coordination in the standards and would shift UGC AICT grant powers to the union ministry and increasing the central control. The National Education Policy of 2020 envisaged four councils. The bill has three. So the stake is uniform regulation of very different institutions may not fit their diversity, and the way forward is explicit institutional national importance carve-outs and an independent adjudicator for the penalties and having a dedicated grants council altogether. The next news is the Catholic Bishops' Conference of India submitted a memorandum against the Foreign Contribution Regulatory Act Amendment Bill 2026 and the Foreign Contribution Regulatory Act Rules of 2026 to the Home Minister of India. So the NGOs, as per the rules, the NGOs must list their activities under five permitted heads, that is, social, political, educational, cultural, and religious, and their geographic area. And the 16 religious activities are allowed, but proselytization is specifically barred. So the trigger clause is the bill creates a designated authority with civil court powers that can take over, manage, or sell and NGOs foreign funded assets if its FCRA registration is suspended, cancelled, or not renewed. So the CBCI's objections are the term proselytization is undefined and open to misuse and stigmatizes faith-based charitable, educational, and the healthcare work, and the asset takeover could even apply retrospectively. So any asset takeover should follow only after a final adjudication, including a statutory appeal to a regular court, and a minor or the technical violation shouldn't attract major penalty of cancellation or confiscation. So this requires a larger balance, regulating the foreign funding of the NGOs on one hand and protecting the civil society space and the freedom of religion under Article 25 on the other hand. The way forward is to define precisely uh, sequence the penalties and separate the minor from major violations. Next, let us look at the case where the Supreme Court bench by Justice Amanullah and Nagu called it disturbing that the Maharashtra routinely opposes bail to the mail but fails to run speedy trials. It arose from a foreign under trial jail for 4+ years with only two of the 45 prosecution witnesses examined. The state conceded it is our fault and that it's improving. The court told Maharashtra to file an affidavit setting out a specific policy or mechanism to tackle the trial delays and the prolonged under trial incarceration erodes the Article 21 right to speedy trial and the bail is the rule, jail is the exception principle, and that if punishment is being given without conviction. So, a day earlier, the court has fined Punjab SP Amritsar with 50,000 rupees in a similar NDPS delay, signaling accountability of the officials, not just courts. So, the systemic roots are witness examination backlogs and the prosecutorial obstruction of bail and the prison overcrowding. The way forward is have state level trial delay policies, more judge to the per witness capacity, and consistent speedy trial jurisprudence. And the matter has been posted to July 24th as the and bail is refused for now. Next, let us look at international relations. The Prime Minister on his three-nation visit has reached New Zealand on the final leg of their tour, and he is the first Indian Prime Minister to visit New Zealand in 4 decades for talks with Prime Minister Christopher Luxon and the diaspora on trade, defense, culture, and people-to-people ties. During the Australian leg of the summit, uh, the, pri- uh, the summit focused on Indo-Pacific security and wrapped up the maritime defense and sealed a civil nuclear deal for the commercial supply of Australian uranium to India. After 2+ years of negotiation, in the Indonesian leg, 14 agreements were inked on critical minerals, maritime security, and other sectors. So the strategic threat is all three legs deepen the Indo-Pacific partnerships and diversify the supply of inputs to the India's growth needs. Uranium is critical for the nuclear power and critical minerals for clean tech and electronics. It matters because securing uranium and the critical minerals reduce dependence on the fewer suppliers, and while maritime cooperation helps balance the regional dynamics. So, and the diaspora dimension outreach to the New Zealand and Australia-based Indians strengthens the people-to-people links and India's soft power. The way forward is to convert these MOAs into concrete supply chain resilience and interoperable maritime security arrangements. Next, uh, the ousted Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, exiled in India since 2024, is facing a death sentence at home. Her Awami League was banned, and she says that she and her senior colleagues plan to return around December and surrender to the authorities in Bangladesh. Okay, she says that a voluntary test of interim government handling of its more prominent opponent. They may arrest me, still I have to go. It's a line taken by the ex-Prime Minister of Bangladesh. The backstory is that she left Bangladesh in 2024 after the protests ended her 20-year rule as a Prime Minister across multiple terms. So now India's dilemma is sheltering Hasina if already a live irritant with Dhaka's interim administration. Her return could reshape the Bangladesh politics and India's calculus with the new government. And the regional stakes are Bangladesh is a key neighbor for the border management, security cooperation and connectivity. How India handles a long-standing partner signals across the neighborhood. So the tension is non-interference and the humanitarian or legal considerations versus protecting the broader bilateral relationship on the other hand. So India carefully balancing the neighborhood first ties with the interim setup against its relation with the Hasina. Next, uh, unfulfilled promise, no Indian Surimitra has migrated to Germany. So 3 years after the BSW Solar SCGJ MOU signed during the German Chancellor's visit in 2023, to place at least 20 Indian Surimitras in Germany's solar sector, not a single technician has migrated. So Suryamitra is an uh, NISC certified solar photovoltaic technician trained under Ministry of New and Renewable Energy scheme via Skill Council for Green Jobs, despite Germany facing an 1 lakh plus solar worker shortage. And this is not the first failure. An earlier Maharashtra Baden-Württemberg bank to send 10,000 skilled workers also produced zero migration by the end of 2025. It has stalled because of language barriers and the non-recognition of the Indian qualifications, and the German firms insist on the vocational on-job standards, and only 18% of the firms actively recruited from abroad despite, and 70% are facing the shortages, especially in um, Bertelsmann, and the migration laws changed and the integration courses were cut. So uh, the contrast is the STEM migration boomed with the professional visa cap raised from 20,000 to 90,000 and 32,800 Indian STEM professionals have migrated, and but the vocational and the skill trade mobility had lagged badly. The lesson is MOAs alone don't move the workers without harmonized standards in the support. The way forward is having mutual recognition of the qualifications, funded upskilling of the German standards, and the German language training. Next, let us look at the West Asia and the Ukraine. So, uh, mysterious and unclaimed airstrikes had hit southern Iran after US said its own attacks were finished, and Iran hasn't blamed anyone, though a lawmaker warned the UAE, and Trump says the talks continue, but the ceasefire is over. The choke point is the US and the Gulf states insist the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow lane carrying much of the world's oil, must stay open to shipping. Separately, Ukrainian drones struck the Russian oil refineries and the Azov port of Taganrog, and Russia says it downed 370 plus drones. So it is quite concerning for India because a large share of India's crude and LNG transits the Strait of Hormuz, and instability there threatens the oil prices and the import bill and inflation and endangers the large Gulf diaspora and its remittances. So, Ukrainians' refinery strikes tighten the global fuel supply, adding another price risk to India's energy import basket. So, two simultaneous energy threat shocks raise the premium on India's supply security and diplomatic balancing. The way forward is to build the strategic reserves and diversify the crude sourcing and the diaspora contingency plan and even handed diplomacy across the blocs. Next, let us look into science and technology. This is how prepared is India for an internet blackout? A TRG data center study on 100 countries ranked India ninth among the nations least likely to be badly hit by a digital breakdown, uh, with a vulnerability score of 23.4 behind United States, Indonesia, and the United Kingdom. So, India's gaps are just 22 submarine cables, while US has 115 submarine cables and only 40 internet exchange points compared to US 209 with a 70% internet penetration. So submarine cables are essentially the physically carry the bulk of the international internet traffic, and IXPs are the hubs where the domestic networks route the traffic locally. So IXPs matter, which are internet exchange points, because exchanging the data domestically instead of routing it abroad lowers the costs and the latency and keeps the networks resilient if the international links fail. Having few internet exchange points means heavier foreign routing dependence, and the cables matter because only 22 cables and the limited landing stations are there. So the damage or congestion concentrates the risk at the fewer choke points. So the take is as India digitizes the governance, payments, and services, network resilience becomes a strategic and sovereignty issue and not just a telecom one. The way forward is to have more submarine cables and landing stations and the denser IXPs, data localization for critical services, and redundant routing. Next, the Union Health Ministry has withdrawn the licensing exemption for formulations containing more than 12% volume by volume of ethyl alcohol in quantities above 30 ml. Such products, example teachers of the cardamom, ginger, and other aromatic preparations, were earlier exempt under Schedule K of the Drug Rules of 1945. Under the new regime, they now need a license under the Drugs and the Cosmetics Act, Drugs and Cosmetics Act of 1940, and are moved to Schedule H1, meaning sale only against a registered medical practitioner prescription with stricter record keeping. So the rationale is some tinctures carry 80 to 90% volume by volume alcohol and are susceptible to misuse for intoxication. Several state governments have flagged this diversion. So it closes a loophole through which the medicinal alcohol was sold as a cheap intoxicant and it channels these products into regulated pharmacy supply chain and has compliance obligations for makers. So the balance is having the tighter control must not choke out the genuine medicinal use of these preparations. Way forward is having retail level enforcement, raising the public awareness and monitoring to protect the legitimate access. Next, uh, Adani Enterprises had partnered with the French clean tech firm uh, Dioxycycle to build India's first formic acid facility that uses the captured carbon dioxide and renewable electricity, beginning with a pilot at Adani site before the commercial scale up. So, formic acid and its derivatives are widely used across textiles, agriculture, and manufacturing. So, a low carbon route has broad demand. So, this is a carbon capture and utilization, turning the captured carbon into saleable chemical rather than only storing it. So, uh, dioxical, electrically driven chemically manufacturing, is combined with Adani's clean energy infrastructure and project execution capability, aiming to make carbon liabilities into cost-effective economic assets. It offers a route to low carbon industrial chemicals and import substitution. It helps decarbonize the hardware-based manufacturing. And the challenge is the CCUs must become economically operative and need reliable green power at scale. The way forward is scaling the carbon capture and utilization affordably, securing the renewable energy supply, and policy support through the standards and incentives for low carbon chemicals. Next, let us look at society and social justice. So, uh, the question is an alleged child abuse incident at the Capgemini's premises in the daycares in Bangalore, which was run by external provider Little Scholars, exposed to the Karnataka's 2015 fresh or the daycare guidelines have remained only on the paper. The guidelines list duties of the parents and the staff, but name no nodal agency to monitor the crashes and do not specify which authority should inspect them. The reality is, officials found many private creches running 30 children with just two caretakers against a suggested norm of only 6 to 8. So, the workplace creches fall under the Maternity Benefit Amendment rules of 2019 and mandatory for the employers with 50 plus staff. But the law is silent on the liability when things go wrong, and the experts invoke vicarious liability and the Code on Social Security 2020 uh, and on the Occupational Safety and Health Code of 2020, which argues the space provider can't wash its hands off. So, NIMHANS, which is based in Bangalore, notes that the trauma can slow the speech or cognitive development of the children and cause aggression, anxiety, and the depression in children. From a gender lens, blaming the working mothers ignores the reliable childcare is what keeps the women in the workforce. The way forward is to name a nodal agency, having a mandatory registration of the child crash providers, and CCTVs have to be installed, and proper staff ratios are to be maintained, and vetting and training needs to be done. Next is AISHE 2023-24 shows that the women enrollment rose from 42% uh, in the 42% in a decade to 2.24. So about 49.7% of all students with a gender parity index of 1.08, that is 108 women enter higher education for every 100 men. And the SC/ST female enrollment rose 51.4% for SC and 75.7% for FT. The catch is the editorial argues that the high enrollment is just a veneer if the pipeline of the jobs beyond the college gates stays broken. So, on one hand, what we see is like women are 44% of the STEM students, but cluster in the general sciences with only 31.1% in engineering and technology, thus isolating them from artificial intelligence, software growth drivers. So, the institutional gap is just 82 female teachers are there per 100 female male teachers, and women are largely absent from the top leadership. The enrollment surge coincided with the private and the low tier colleges facing faculty shortages. So the labor market realities, as per the periodic labor force survey 2025 shows, men dominated salaried workers with 26.5% vis-a-vis the women 18.2%. And the out-earned women, while men earn on an average 24,217 rupees per month, women earn 18,353 rupees per month. And 64.2% of the women are self-employed, a category that often marks the unpaid family and the farm labor. The way forward is to improve the safety and provide the care infrastructure and link the STEM to the industry bridges are required. And the pay gap action is required to bring the gender parity in the salaries so the degrees convert into jobs. The next is about regulate the platforms and not just who logs in. So, the editorial argues against the blanket age ban on the social media, as Prime Minister has praised the Australia's 2024 under 16 ban, which is being thought over by Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka. So, the research links the social media use to harm more among the girls, but does not show that the age bans improve the mental health because 85% of 12 to 16-year-olds in Australia still use the platforms, making the ban a natural experiment. So the alternative is stronger duty of care and digital literacy in the schools and chronological feeds for the minors, curbs on the addictive design, and better moderation and parental controls. So yeah, European Union has warned Meta to change the Facebook and Instagram addictive design, endless scroll or autoplay or hyper-personalized feeds, or face a fine up to 6% of the global turnover. It regulates the design and not the access. The nuance is It harms sleep loss, cyberbullying, self-harm, and eating disorder content coexist with the benefits like peer support, identity exploration, community and mental health information. So change how the platforms operate rather than policing who may enter, that is, who is going to access the internet. So having platform conduct regulations and safety by design over the user bans is the way forward. Next, the UN Women says that at least 1 million of women and the girls have lost access to the critical services because of dramatic foreign aid cuts since the January 2025, led by United States cuts and other major donors also tightened. The women's frontline organizations, especially in Afghanistan, Gaza, Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan, and Yemen, are collapsing just as when the needs are increasing. Officials call the figure as the tip of the iceberg. So, with the armed conflicts at their highest since the World War II, 120 million women and the girls need the humanitarian aid, and 84% of the 855 surveyed women organizations across 52 crisis countries report rising demand. And the survivors of the conflict-related sexual violence, displaced mothers, and the girls forced out of the school are hit the hardest. And every dollar withdrawn from the women's organization is a dollar withdrawn from these survivors. So, uh, the systemic risk is cutting the locally rooted women-led groups removes the very actors best placed to reach these populations. The way forward is to have protected, flexible funding for the local women-led organizations and burden sharing among the donors. Next, let us look at internal security and disaster management. So, the Vizag fishing tragedy exposes a deep sea safety deficit. Near the Gangavaram port near Visakhapatnam, a mechanized vessel capsized on July the 4th in a sudden low pressure surge, and six out of the seven fishers are presumed to be dead, and one survived an 18-hour ordeal before passing. The cargo ship rescued him. So, a multi-agency search and rescue used the Coast Guard vessels and inquest drift models and the Navy advanced light helicopters and Dornier aircraft from INS Dega, which was called off after 72 hours. So, the root causes are Andhra's fleet is limited to 5 to 15-meter boats vis-a-vis 24-meter central norm, and most of these boats lack the basic ILO safety kit corresponding having the satellite transponders, uh, EPIRBs, life rafts, and the crew insurance. So the crews are cut off once beyond the mobile tower range. So the climate drivers are pollution and warming that have emptied near the shore zones and pushing the fishers 30 plus kilometers out of the trips, lasting between 12 to 168 hours, which are far riskier expeditions. So the relief is 10 lakh rupees of ex gratia was fast tracked via government geo, bypassing the 7-year presumed dead weight under the Indian Evidence Act. But the Federation calls it a band-aid on a gaping wound. Way forward is having the mandatory EPIRBs and transporters and institutionalize the crew insurance and early warning outreach for the deep sea crews. Next, data retreat, falling terror numbers, rising structural risks. The global terrorism has fell in 2025 with 5,582 deaths across 2,944 incidents, and these are 28% less deaths and 22% less attacks, and 81 nations have improved. Okay, the world is becoming unevenly unsafe as per the uh, author. Because it aggregates the aggregate decline masks a structural mutation and risks normalizing terror as tax on modern civilization. So the concentration, 70% of the deaths are compressed into just five countries, with Pakistan, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Niger, and Democratic Republic of Congo. The Sahel alone has over half of the global fatalities. 99% of the terror deaths occur in the states already in armed conflicts, and 60% of the attacks strike within 100 kilometers of the international borders. Decentralized, digitally recruited, lone actor violence is rising. So the dominant threats are five networks now lead, which are Islamic State and JNIM, PTP, which buck the decline by increasing attacks, Lashkar-e-Taiba and Al-Shabaab. And India is exposed to this terror violence as we are having a volatile neighborhood and cross-border security challenges, and India-Pakistan overhang, which demands constant recalibration. The way forward is build the state capacity and border sovereignty, align the development aid with the security, and dismantle the online radicalization pipelines. Next, after a rape of 12-year-old in Baripur in West Bengal, the accused Prabhas Mandal was killed in a police encounter during a crime reconstruction. The CID has begun a probe as the right bodies demand a judicial inquiry by a sitting High Court judge. The total arrests in the case have reached 35, with 4 FIRs covering rape, murder, and related mob violence, an attack on the police outpost, and lynching. So the red votes invoke the Supreme Court's PUCL versus Maharashtra case of 2014 and 16-point encounter guidelines and DK Basu versus State of West Bengal case of 1997 on arrest and custody safeguards and the NHRC encounter death norms, including a mandatory FIR against the police in a magisterial inquiry. Public anger at a heinous crime on one hand, and the due process and the rule of law on the other hand is a tension here. An encounter cannot substitute for trial, however grave the offense may be. So the activists note a reconstruction without cameras at 1 a.m. is implausible, underlining the need for documented independent investigation. The way forward is having an independent camera documented probe and magisterial inquiry and comply with the NHRC norms. And next, let us look at history and the culture. So, the first batch of Kailash Manasarovar Yatra pilgrims entered Tibet from Uttarakhand via Lipulekh Pass, which is the shortest pass between India and China, and then stayed a straight run route to the sacred Mount Kailash and Lake Manasarovar. The Kumaon Mandal Vikas Nigam is the nodal agency operating from the Archula base camp, and the first batch had 48 pilgrims plus doctor and support staff, and the second was delayed by a landslide. So, the significance of Kailash Manasarovar Yatra is it is both a revered Hindu pilgrimage site and a barometer of India-China border normalization, since Lipu Lake lies in a sensitive tri-junction area. So functioning pilgrim routes double as confidence building measures between the two countries and the markers of the border infrastructure development and the diplomatic power. So the practical risk is high altitude and landslide prone terrain makes the safety and the weather management essential, and the way forward is to have robust high altitude logistics and sustained diplomatic facilitation to keep the route open. And the questions for practice are: one, India's ethanol blending program is at once and agriculture, energy security, and climate intervention. Uh, Critically examine its trade-offs, including vehicle efficiency and consumer transparency. Second question is anchoring the removal of high constitutional functionaries to custody rather than conviction risks treating an unproven accusation as de facto disqualification. Discuss with reference to the Constitution 130th Amendment Bill. Third, a single national regulator for higher education tests both institutional autonomy and the federal scheme under entry number 66 of the Union List, analyzed in the light of VBSA Bill of 2025. And the last one is recurrent deep sea fishing tragedies reveal a safety equipment and regulatory deficit worsened by climate change, suggest a framework to protect the Indian fishes. Thank you. That's it for today. And we will meet again with the tomorrow's news.